Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the continuing Curious Realm coverage of Stairway to the Stars here at the Luxor in Las Vegas, Nevada. We have with us returning guests who we met at MUFON this last year in Ohio. Jim Lawrence, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
Fantastic. You are an investigator out of New Brunswick, Canada,
yes. Yep.
and let's get into a few of the cases that you've had recently and stuff.
Okay, so case-wise in New Brunswick, what's happening in New Brunswick is that in New Brunswick we have the Stanton Friedman Museum, and Stanton Friedman actually passed away 4 years ago. So the standard everyday city museum decided to take a couple rooms after Stanton's death, and it turned out to be so popular that it's actually exceeded everything they've ever done.
Awesome.
So, and then what else is happening in New Brunswick is that New Brunswick, according to Chris Grotrowski, he's the gatekeeper of our UFO files. Oh, okay. And he says that he has 30,000 files on UFOs in Canada. Wow. And he tracks the UFO. That's our UFO center in Canada, and he says that New Brunswick has more cases than any other province in Canada, which is kind of amazing considering it's one of the smallest provinces in Canada. Yeah. Only 650,000 people live there, and so it might be because there's less light pollution, maybe because people are more outdoors more, or it could be, we joke around, maybe there's nothing else to do in New Brunswick except look for UFOs.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
You know, well, I mean, proximity to the ocean, things like that as well.
Right.
I spent 5-6 years of my life right up there in Portland, Maine, and
cool,
the whole Acadia coast right up there is littered with sightings regularly.
Exactly, yes.
And now, let's get into a couple of the recent cases.
Well, okay, for New Brunswick, I got about 3 or 4 cases that really come to mind. Okay. One of my favorite cases, as I started investigating UFOs in New Brunswick, is that first off, most people think that abduction started basically in 1961, the Betty and Barney Hill case. But I actually uncovered one that was in 1936 by a lady by the name of Hazel Davis. In 1936, she reported that when she was 80 years old, that she reported this, that she was abducted by little gray aliens when she was just a little girl. And she was only like 9 years old then. And then when she was 17 years old in 1943, she was taken on board the craft. Wow. And so that certainly predates probably common ufology in abductions.
And of course those dates predate things like MUFON, NICAP, all that kind of stuff. Yes. Where was her report actually made?
Where was it made?
Yeah.
Well, actually, it started...
Was it like the local police department?
No, actually, it was, there was a lady, she's passed away now. I picked it up in my research. I picked it up of a local book that was basically out of print. And so this lady was an author, and she did like oddity book, like UFOs, spirituality, angels, a dog that was gone for a year and come back, and so on. Special printings, and she met this lady when she was 80 years old, and she was very engaging and very smart, and that's where she picked up the whole story.
Wow.
And it's, yeah.
And those 2 experiences, did she give any detail of those or anything like that?
Tremendous, but it's, so moving on to another case. In New Brunswick, we actually have a military base called Gagetown in the middle of New Brunswick. And to kind of set the stages, as far as we know, there has been no nuclear on that base, or now it could be, that if there was, we probably wouldn't know about it, but we don't think there really was. There'd be no need to. So a guy by the name of David Marceau in 1992 was actually an American military person stationed up in Gagetown for a year. And he was, at the middle of the night, He was guarding a munition dump in contact with another soldier, and a UFO floated in over about 300 feet over the ground, and he said it was 1 acre long.
Wow!
Just hovering there. So that's it. That's just basically.
That's massive.
That is massive, and it even gets even more massive. We'll bring into some really good cases happen on the edge of New Brunswick, which is called Loring Air Force Base, which is in northern Maine.
Yep.
Now, for those who don't know, that's literally a 40-minute drive from Canada, or maybe like 4 minutes away a UFO flies. So basically, this Loring Air Force Base was closed in 1994, but the UFO sightings go clear back. The first one I found was in 1964. Now, to start with, keep in mind, Loring Air Force Base was the most important Air Force base in the United States during the Cold War because it's last stop to Russia.
That's right.
And also, we know for a fact that they stored nuclear warheads there, and they had a fair amount of nuclear there. So in 1964, a guy by the name of Gary Ames reported that he was out on duty at the Air Force Base, and there was a UFO 20 to 30 feet wide, 10 feet high, and he was about 1 city block away. He pulled out his 10 times telescope, and Army-issued telescope, and he could see it floating 2 or 3 feet off the runway with a purple glow under it.
Ooh.
But interesting enough, when he checked in later as the incident died down, later at the day, he talked to another guy who's seen it, who was only a half a city block away, and he described exactly the same thing, and it was trapezoidal in shape, and he says when it took, he described the exact same thing. He said when it took off at the speed of just a blur. So that wasn't the end of the story. A number of days later, on the base, the rumors started getting around that 4 or 5 days later, in the same time frame, basically, that one of the soldiers had actually seen 2 alien beings out in the same area, and he fired a warning shot, and they did not stop, so he fired 2 shots directly at them. The next day, they found the bullet holes in the snowbank, and so that was interesting. And so it was just kind of a rumor, and then within a couple of days he was gone. He was either discharged or moved off the base, and so anyway, and the rumor kind of got around, and the rumor was nobody really took it seriously because they said, oh, he was firing at little green men. So the first guy I talked about who actually seen the UFO and made the report, actually after they are both out of the service, he happened to track the guy down or happened to bump into him and was talking to him. And he goes, and the guy told him, the guy that shot at the animals, he says, look, I'll tell you 2 things. This case was real, and he says they weren't green, they were gray. Wow. So I thought it was kind of good. And then on that same Loring Air Force Base, a little bit later, we're moving back from 1964 to 1969, a guy by the name of Joe Waltuck was actually an Air Force pilot. And so the way he reported it, and you can find this on YouTube, basically, the Loring Air Force Base is at the northern end of Maine, just before Canada.
Yep.
So he was flying a bomber up from Portland, Maine, the southern end of, from where you live, the southern end of Maine. But meanwhile, about the time he left Portland, a huge triangle came in from the Canadian side and hovered over the base. Now, this is long before triangles started getting to be reported. And about the time he got to Bangor, that's an hour away by car, the UFO slowly goes up. And when he got and landed with his co-pilot, he looked up and he could see the triangle quite a ways in the air. So basically, and then after we went in to get the report, to get debriefed, the triangle comes back down. Long after he retired, what he did is he happened to be, long after he retired, he he was at a MUFON conference, and back in the 80s, but there wasn't very many pictures of these, and suddenly up on the screen somebody pulled up a picture of a triangle UFO, and he actually is in the front row, and he jumps right at me. He said, "That's what I seen." His wife says, sit down, you're embarrassing me, right? So he was just kind of taken by. So it, and then even later, 1975, there was, on the same Air Force base, there was a UFO that came in around and checked out checked out their weapons area for 44 minutes. And then it buzzed around, it had multiple witnesses, and then moved off the base and headed towards Grand Falls, New Brunswick, into Canada, and then went off the radar base. But what was interesting about this was it got written up in the Bangor Daily News as normal news, and the whole sightings, and then published in some of the smaller local papers. Now, I'm in my investigations, I'm pretty sure that that would have never made the Los Angeles Times and so on. As studying ufology, we know why. But it's but you just remember, like from a United States perspective, this Bangor Daily News is a pretty good main paper, but in the 52 states, it's a nothing paper.
Oh, absolutely,
right.
Absolutely. Well, and that's one of the things that I bring up regularly on the show is the fact of we, especially reporting-wise, sharing-wise, things like that, though these things are vastly different than they used to be. I mean, I turn 50 next year. Yeah. I remember locking my bike up at the library, and if they didn't have the book, I had to order it.
Yep.
I didn't have the internet. I didn't have these things.
Exactly.
I didn't wake up knowing what happened in Poughkeepsie.
Exactly.
Yep. Maybe there was a morning show where there would be some national news, but aside from that, it was Tom Brokaw in the evening, and he had the national news.
Yes.
And Bangor Daily News is one of those, even if you lived in Portland, you'd have to special order it. You couldn't go and just pick it up at the grocery store.
Another one just slightly out of New Brunswick is in Nova Scotia. We have the famous Shag Harbor case.
Yeah.
But interesting enough, we got Chris Stiles, who's been investigating that since 1967. But the more interesting one that's just come to light the last year is when he was investigating the 1967 Shag Harbor crash, which was actually a UFO that actually went into the water and then floated away. And Laurie Wilkins he's still living, 80 years old, at the Shag Harbor Museum, and he'll tell you about his actual sighting. But more interesting, over the years, Chris actually spent 45 years investigating what's called the Shelburne case. Now, for many years, he tied it to, he was talking to different people in the military that had their NDAs and non-disclosure agreements. And so he spent about 30-some years playing one against the other, get to tell this or that. So he actually, the thing is about 3 different people that he actually was interviewing over the years. And he would get a little piece out of this place and he'd play him against the other and he'd say, he says, this guy told me this and so on. So the story basically has come out that 7 years prior to Shag Harbor in Shelburne, there was a naval war exercise with about 20 warships and 10 American, and this is in Shelburne, and 10 American and 10 Canadian ships. But and in the middle of these war games, there was one ship that stopped what they were doing, and under the water was 2 UFOs. And they were obviously, there was aliens on the outside, and they were trying to repair the ship. So what made this interesting, he heard the stories, but he actually managed to, for 3 days, basically what's happened is, for 3 days, they were monitoring this, and it made up such a stir that the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the American military actually flew a helicopter up onto this ship to check it out. And also they put the whole ship on what was called DEFCON 1 alert. Which in history has now, if you check Wikipedia, they've only been at DEFCON 3. So you can Google that and figure out what that whole story was about. but he actually managed to track down, and they were sending divers down every day for 3 days to take videos of what these aliens are doing, but keeping their distance. And Chris managed to actually track down the guy who actually took all those videos.
Whoa.
And then he's just brought out a book called Clear Sweep 5. You can just Google it on Amazon. Okay. And there's the whole story. And and I know Chris Stiles really well.
Wow.
And there was a similar case of that, probably in Newfoundland. And if you Google Richard French UFO, you'll find it in the 2013 congressional hearings telling about almost the same incident, but he has it a few years earlier. So the question is, could have been the same incident? Who knows? But they're both really interesting incidents.
Wow. Well, and all of these are remarkable instances and great examples of cases that have been around for years that are still being investigated. Yep. And I think that bears to be witnessed right now, because a lot of people don't realize the fact that investigations don't just stop.
That's right.
You know, I mean, unless it comes to the fact of, okay, this is a balloon. Mm-hmm. You saw a balloon, you saw this, something like that. Every MUFON case, every NICAP, doesn't really matter. These cases remain open, and much like the Pascagoula case, information keeps coming in, keeps coming in, keeps coming in.
Exactly. And I found that I only really started actively investigating. I've been reading about this subject since I was 5 years old, or probably 12 years old. And what I found when I started about 2 years ago, that most of the cases I'm investigating are over 20 years old, and they're inside of families. In fact, one that I investigated, I actually knew the family, and this guy's still living in 1967, and they had a major UFO sighting. But the interesting part about it was I knew his kids. I went to school with his kids, and I never heard the story until it leaked out indirectly by his daughter, but it was actually a story that was around the family supper table, but they never brought it to time.
But never shared with other people.
Exactly.
You know, and it's interesting how so frequently stories are not shared outside of families, but also how these stories and shared experiences within families can actively cause consternation in the families. Even the fact of one of the, not family-wise, but friend-wise, Terry Lovelace is an example I give all the time. But when he had his abduction experience, he was out camping with a guy in Devil's Den State Park that he was an EMT rider with in the military. Like, not only, that's like being a police officer and rolling with somebody when you're an EMT. Like, you see crazy things. You have a bond with that person that's in a different way. And their experience drove them apart to the fact that they were not able to speak about this experience with each other.
That's right.
You know, so to know that this family was talking about it within their family, was there any, I guess, angst within the family for not letting the story out?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, stigma is a powerful thing.
It is.
And I know how it all works, because from the time I was 12 years old to 2 years ago, I never told a single soul that I was interested in this subject. I come to the conclusion the stigma is really, so after 2 years, and I come up with some clever lines how to break to break into a conversation, and but the stigma is really 90% at you. It kind of breaks down to, this is what I find. I'll tell them, we'll wait till the time's relaxed. I mentioned I'm a UFO investigator, and then suddenly about 25-30% just basically say, "Wow, that's cool," or "I know somebody. Yeah, my brother-in-law is really into that," and then about 50% is really, "Yeah, that's cool. What's on for football tonight?" They just don't care. And then I find the pushback is only about 1 to 2%. Okay. And, I'll mention it, and they'll go, "Well, you're not going to get me to buy in that conspiracy stuff, so you better find another thing to talk about." So that's what, and so with that, but what I have found is, consistently in the last 2 years, I mentioned it to 10 people, one's going to tell me a case.
The
first time they're going to search it out, and they'll go. And a lot of times the line will come up, suddenly they bring it up and I go, do you believe in UFOs? So I just joke around and I said, well, I don't believe in UFOs. Belief constitutes faith. I know there's UFOs. It goes, oh, then they'll start telling me their story.
Right. That's right. And that is a great way to put it, because yes, belief constitutes faith, and that's different than knowing fact.
Yep.
You know, and 2017, and Lou Elizondo going on the news at Christmas time, shortly before Christmas, it was December 17th, with his videos. Really changed the conversation worldwide.
It sure has. It has opened it up, and it's actually filtering down to the younger crowd is now more interested. I'm seeing a lot more younger people.
Oh, this last year at MUFON, like half the crowd was in their 30s and below.
And then what I'm finding too is then TikTok's taking over. For a long time, I couldn't find much credible on TikTok, but now I'm finding that the UFO Facebook legitimate sites are taking the simps out of TikTok and then putting them onto their normal mainstream. Yeah. And so they're picking up more that way. And so it, yes. Yeah. So as a ufologist in my area now, I've been investigating UFOs in New Brunswick, and I'm studying now to be to certify with MUFON. So I'm a little ways off from that yet. I've just been too busy with all the other stuff, but I keep in close contact with the neighboring provinces, particularly PEI, Nova Scotia, and actually Maine, and and then I actually go around those areas doing a slideshow presentation on the subject. And my goal really on doing the presentation is bring in what would just say interesting cases, but just basically the slideshow is set up to just the kind of let those people wondering that this phenomenon is real. Yeah. And so anybody here at this event will certainly, if they're here attending, they probably got a pretty good idea that probably is real. And then my contribution to the UFO world is I actually do what's called computer graphics and do up like a artistic rendering of what they actually seen. All right. And then beyond that, I'm the chief admin on what's called UFO New Brunswick, is where I usually put my articles. And I'll start with New Brunswick cases and then move into Canada, and then usually some historical cases or what's kind of happening throughout the UFO world.
What advice would you give somebody who has witnessed or is out gathering evidence?
Well, if they're watching this, they can certainly contact myself, and which you probably have the contact info on this video presentation, and I'd be happy to take the report, or just Google MUFON, which is the world's largest UFO organization, really respected. And the other advice I get was, because I see it on social media, I reported it back 9 years ago and nobody got a hold of me. Well, you got to make things happen. I mean, keep in mind that people at MUFON are working for free, but they're very passionate. And if you can lock in with somebody and try again. Absolutely. And if you're looking for things to do around New Brunswick, my area, if you want to, so I often say, like, if you want to do a UFO excursion, the Shag Harbor, which is a good place to start. Every October now, they're doing a Shag Harbor event. Awesome. So an idea, you could drive to Fredericton, New Brunswick, or fly to Fredericton, New Brunswick, and do the tour of the UFO Museum. It has Stanton Friedman in it. And then another hour, you can go to the Digby Ferry and go to Yarmouth for a weekend UFO event. And they use like Nick Pope was at the last 2 years he was there, and Martin Willis was there this year. And we usually have about 4 or 5 big names, and Chris Dahl usually will do his on the Shelburne case that I just talked about. And then from there, on that event, they will actually drive you to the crash site on a bus to the Shag Harbor crash area. And then there's actually a little museum there, the Shag Harbor Museum, about the size of a bungalow house. And it's well put together. And then after the event, you can drive to Halifax, see that, and then drive back home, or fly back home from Halifax. So it can be a one-way trip. That's a good thing to do on, like, you know.
Awesome.
And that's every October. Just Google. It's called Shag Harbor UFO Expo every year.
Awesome. Well, I'll have to check that one out. Before we let you go, let everybody know where they can go to get in touch with you, where they can go to like, follow, subscribe, where they can go to find out more information about UFOs in New Brunswick. Well,
in New Brunswick, the easiest way to get a hold of me is go to UFO New Brunswick, which is a Facebook page. And then, and then I actually, if you want to send me a message, I'll actually mail out this magazine that I print in-house, and that's just New Brunswick cases, probably cases you haven't even heard about, and I've compiled that all in the magazine. I'm happy to mail it out to anybody who wants to make contact with me, and you can find my info on this YouTube header.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, thank you so much for your time. Once again, my friend, I love having you on whenever we're here at these events.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
While you are online checking out all of the amazing work of Jim Lawrence in New Brunswick, make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com is the website. That's where you can like, follow, subscribe. That's where you can find the books and videos from our guests. That's where you can follow their YouTube channels. Stay tuned through these commercial breaks, folks. We'll be right back with our continuing coverage of Stairway to the Stars here in Las Vegas, Nevada at the Luxor. We'll be right back after this.